Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Sonic Adventure DX-ish. In the last part we started off Gamma's campaign, and now we've made our way to the main meat of the gameplay for this playthrough, where we're going to be going into stages actually trying to find the rest of the E100 series to save them from Mega Man's grasp. Funnily enough, last part was probably overall majority cutscene. This part's the exact opposite. Gamma's campaign is very front-loaded when it comes to its cutscenes. Where most of them are all at the start, and then we don't get another one for, I think, even maybe 1 or 2 stages after the start here. So, with that said, for Gamma's first overall real stage in terms of what you're trying to do in it, we need to access Windy Valley, but we still need to go find the stone in order to open it, but thankfully it is in the same location it's been in every other playthrough we've really been to Windy Valley, and it's over here in front of Tails' house. Why it spawns here? I don't know. Maybe it's like Tails' lawn gnome. With that said, Windy Valley is going to be the showcase for a bit of a problem with Gamma's campaign, where as much as I like the main mechanic of it as a run and gun, both between his actual speed and the level design sections they choose for you to go through in them, Gamma's campaign, you can blink and miss some of the stages, honestly. I'd say probably they're some of the fastest versions of these stages, barring getting 3 emeralds in good places in Knuckles' stages, or perfectly hitting Froggy first try as Big. This is also what causes what I believe I mentioned last time, where, yes, the main thing with this campaign is you gain time by doing shot combos to extend the timer, but that timer is almost never going to be an actual threat, even on a first run, especially when you have enemies like that that are 9 segments into themselves, which will give you over a half minute of time added in. So you have plenty of time, and even taking it slowly, I don't think I've ever gotten the game over to time in any level that's not the final level in this particular playthrough. And that's because that is just the longest stage in the playthrough. With that said, something I thought about while recording the footage for this LP that I never really considered before. So, Gamma's series of robots is the E100 series. E101 is beta, and it moves forward from there using other Greek letters, such as E103 Delta here, who is the exact same fight as beta. Just he's blue. I'm gonna need to look into the text of this, but I can't help but wonder if 0 is meant to be E100 period, as the numbering just lines up a little too well there. As with Beta and Sonic, 3 shots and Delta is down, then you get a large explosion and the stage is over. Like I said last time, Gamma's boss fights, with exactly 1 exception, don't really get to stick around long enough to do much, to a point where it's a very fun power trip, but it makes the journey definitely feel underwhelming, I guess is the word I should use here. Also, we were supposed to save them. Destroy? What? That's not the right word there at all, Gamma. With Windy Valley out of the way, though, we immediately have access to Gamma's next stage, and given the fact we just saw that part of the wall crumble, there's only really 1 stage in that direction, so it's time for us to go after Red Mountain. Actually, I'm only just now realizing everything we do in the latter half of this campaign is over here in Mystic Ruins. We never need to head over to Station Square. I'm not even sure if you technically can head over there right now as Gamma if you wanted to go talk to NPCs. I mean, I guess you could. I doubt there's much stopping you, but... Huh. I never really thought about it like that before. Also, because we've already grabbed both of the upgrades for Gamma at this point. A detail I like about Gamma when he actively grabs a power-up, since he has a swivel in the center of his body, he just rotates his entire upper body around to hold the power-up to take a look at it, rather than trying to, like, bend his limbs around. There's something about that that's funny. Robots can be tricky to animate in a way that's interesting, but when you do it right, ooh, it's so good. Also something that makes me laugh every time I play this game. To get into Red Mountain, of course, as Sonic and Knuckles, we needed a power-up. The Lightspeed attack as Sonic, and the Digging Claws as Knuckles in order to find the switch to destroy the monkeys. Gamma can just shoot the little shit. And there's something about how blunt that is that never fails to make me laugh. For now, though, it is time for Gamma's Red Mountain, which is entirely set inside the mountain, which we saw this section during Sonic's playthrough. If there is something that Gamma's playthrough kind of highlights, though, It's that enemy placement in this game is kind of haphazard. It's just kind of all over the place, and a lot of them can be very easily ignored. You don't want to as Gamma, or any of them, if you're trying to go for points, of course. But as Gamma in specific, he's the only character that really needs to do a lot of fighting, as it's how you keep his timer up and don't get a game over. Like, there's the occasional time as Sonic you'll need to do something like that, namely with homing attack chains. If anything, the biggest purpose a lot of the enemies are going to serve is if you're going for 100% including Chow Garden, since the animals they serve there are so key to doing that, and since I really don't mess with it, I tend to ignore it. Like, there's an entire, like, subset of mechanics just for the animals themselves where, yes, as I mentioned during, I think, the time we showed them off as Sonic, animals will raise Chow stats. Different animals within a different subset will raise stats different amounts. And I think there's, like, background stats that aren't actually shown on the meters that are exclusive to, like, SA2 and every release of Sonic Adventure 1 that's not the Dreamcast version. When and if I ever get to that follow-up LP where I go for the rest of the emblems. I'm either going to have a lot to talk about during the Chow section or not a lot. Really depends on how fast that all goes in both recording and editing. I'll probably need even more topics to talk about during the SA2 version, though, as SA2 adds a lot more mini-games for the Chow to do that SA1 does not have. For now, though, we're at the end of the level, which means it's time to face off against our next E100 series model. This is E104 Epsilon. I know for a fact he fires missiles because he actually managed to get one off. It doesn't hit me because you can lock onto them, but he attacked. That's better than a couple of the other bosses have done in this campaign. This is also where they start giving the bosses a little more health, so it takes like 5 or 6 shots instead of 3, but all that does is extend the fight's length. It doesn't make it more difficult overall. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if behind the scenes they looked at these boss fights and went, there's potential here, but we just didn't reach it here, and that's why SA2 has the mech levels to begin with on both routes. Even if they work much more with one character than another, but I'll save that whole topic for when I eventually reach SA2. Which might be sooner than later, I don't know, I'll figure it out. I still want to do a couple of other Sonic games before I do another 3D one. Because these games are relatively long for what I tend to do on the channel.
E103 Delta, E104 Epsilon, rescue mission accomplished. E105 Zeta, E101 Beta, location unknown. Perhaps aboard the egg carrier.
So our next destination is the Egg Carrier. This is technically the best time to go and get Gamma's second power-up if you're trying to be streamlined, but I wanted to get it earlier to use it for more of the playthrough.
E-Series data. Beginning search. Accessing data. Hot shelter. E-Series location confirmed. Unlocking hot shelter sector now.
As Gamma just said, our final level for his campaign is the Hot Shelter, and it's far and away his longest stage. If there's any stage you're likely to actually have danger of time running out due to either improper combos with your blaster or just not really doing too well in some of the platforming, it's gonna be this level. And if they ever do a remake of this, I would really like to see them just expand the other levels in such a way where that's more of a threat the entire time. Assuming they keep this gameplay the same for him to begin with, I could see them doing some changes here and there to make it feel a little different as it is. Maybe make it feel a little more like a third-person shooter or something. I don't know. Honestly, one of the more likely things is they're probably going to make it feel a little more like the Avatar stages in Forces. For better or worse. And I'm just talking in terms of concept, of course, more so than execution. Like maybe different weapon upgrades or weapons you can swap to with Gamma. Also, you know what? I mean, this is very off-topic, but I might as well talk about it. Like 2 days ago on Twitter, I saw people talking about Forces in specific, but it was in a positive light, namely that, in retrospect, it really seems that may have been when they were trying to start course-correcting away from what they had been throughout the 2010s up to that point. They didn't exactly succeed on the gameplay, but especially on the soundtrack perspective, vocal themes were a big thing for Sonic. From like the mid-90s even, technically, counting like Sonic R. All the way through to like the late 2000s, but starting with Sonic Colors or so, they only really did one per game. And while yes, that one per game was still usually really solid, it definitely felt like there was something missing. Forces has like 8+ vocal themes in it, and they're largely pretty good. A little cheesy at points, yes, but largely good. And then you just look at what they did with Frontiers, where all the boss themes are vocal themes, and they're so beloved by the fan base, even from frame 1. And it's like, okay, maybe they were starting to realize the direction they should have been going in, but they either couldn't go that way all the way due to interior meddling, or things that had already been started that they couldn't really stop, kind of deal. It's one of those things I've said before on the channel where I would really wish we got more postmortems a couple of years down the line from developers on games to talk about what they wanted to do with them, things they were proud of, things that maybe they realized they could have done more with. Most of that nowadays, if they don't do it outright, which is again pretty rare, especially out of Japan, we usually hear that kind of stuff in art books, which at least means we get to hear it, but I wish we got to hear more direct, like, developer thoughts a couple of years down the line. Because I think we could learn a lot about the process that every game went through from that alone. Even just talking about, like, oh yeah, interiorly, we hated doing this specific boss fight because we couldn't get this to work. Because that, I think that's interesting to read and learn about. So this is where Gamma's Hot Shelter can be a particularly strenuous level on the timer. We have a train platforming section. There's going to be 2 trains running parallel to each other. I think maybe even a couple more now that I think about it. And you got to jump between them back and forth in order to get through this section. You can theoretically wait for the trains to reach a point where you can jump from one to another pretty safely, but you can also jump on them early or late to get a little bit of a lead in depending on what you're trying to do. With that said, if you're not careful, you will fall onto the ground, which I think is instant kill. I think it's been a while since I actually fell on it, honestly. Oh god. So yeah, that's a case where I probably should have waited, but I'm reckless at times. Now, while I was recording this LP, I actually had a realization about a specific sound effect from the series. And namely, it's the sound effect that plays whenever you land from a high distance as Gamma, the like clung. That's very metallic sounding. That sound effect is also in Sonic Battle. And it's a lot louder there, and it's one of the sound effects that's always just kind of stuck with me. I think because I used to hear it so often, because Sonic Battle, pros and cons aside, can be a little bit of a sound design mismatch with all the things you can hear going at once. I might tackle that as an LP at some point. There's enough to talk about with that game, but also it's surprisingly long for what it is. And there's some bullshit fights in that game in my memory. Once you're off the train, though, you're pretty close to the end of the level. Just one more giant vertical drop section, then a small platform section, then we're at the boss. And because the boss goes by, once again, pretty quickly, I'm actually going to showcase something about it now. If you pay attention to the boss's textures at the base of it, because it's kind of round-looking, there are actually several white panels that are literally just the top of a Sega Dreamcast. And I'm not gonna lie, I find that adorable. They've done things like that with the Dreamcast across Sonic games kind of regularly. There's a very similar blink and you'll miss it moment in Sonic Unleashed that I'll showcase when I eventually get to that game. For right now, though, let's just get onto this ramp and then ride it on up to the next boss fight past this checkpoint. This is going to be E105 Delta. Delta is one of the few bosses in this campaign that can actually fight back, especially considering you have a pretty atypical way of damaging him. He's got several cannons that will fire out missiles. The cannons themselves are the target. And because you're on a constantly rotating stage, it's pretty easy to get thrown off kilter and maybe either miss a jump, miss a shot, or things like that. If you make the shots, the fight's over pretty quickly, but it could be problems. And if you look just below on all the white panels, those are the Dreamcast lids. I guess Eggman had way too many of them hanging around from something and used them as pieces. And with that, all that now remains is the final cutscenes, as well as Gamma's final boss. Honestly, I think what I'm kind of sad about with this campaign, though, is that it is still pretty short. I think this one could easily be the length of at least, like, Tails' campaign, but it's ultimately only about the length of Amy's. And even then, it's mostly a lot of cutscenes at first, and then all the stages happen in a row, and the stages themselves are pretty short. Again, I would really like to see a lot of expansion for this campaign in specific if they ever do a remake.
E105 Zeta rescue complete. Units remaining. Gamma. Beta.
Time to go fight Gamma's final boss, because Beta wasn't just torn apart by that machine for a cutscene, he got a full-out upgrade. Beta Mach 2 not only has one of my favorite songs in the game, genuinely this might be my favorite boss fight in the game. By default, you can't really hit him, as he'll either dodge out of the way, he'll knock your shots away, or put up a shield. You need to wait for him to do his dash attack. Afterwards, he's a little exhausted and tired out, his core's exposed from behind, and you can shoot him. However, the more shots of damage you do to him, the more charges he'll be able to do in a row. On top of that, he can fire out his missiles that track onto you in various amounts. I think he'll max out around 6, but he can do like 2 or 3 volleys that in a row later on in the fight. And he can also teleport to the distance to fire away homing shots. The final shot by default of those is large, but as you go into the fight, he will fire more and more and more of those. This fight keeps you on your toes pretty well compared to a lot of the other boss fights, especially every other boss fight within Gamma's own campaign. And I like it a lot. In some regards, it actually feels like a little bit of a Mega Man boss fight. Maybe that's why I like it so much. But it's really good. Again, one of my favorite songs in the game, too. You can tell he's doing the final shot of those whenever he charges it for a little bit longer than the other ones. Well, I don't need to be this complicated. I feel like one of the best things they could do in a potential remake for the other bosses is just make them actually use their environments more on top of making them have more HP and being able to fight back a little more easily, as that goes a long way for Beta here specifically in Mach 2. But with their destruction, Gamma's campaign is now complete, and the game is almost over. One more thing to showcase in the main LP after this, and well, yeah, everyone kind of already knows, but I gotta play vague, I mean, come on. I love that ending so much. I love the piano piece. I love the walk away. Genuinely, Gamma's story, I think, is the most interesting across the games. Before I get into my main thoughts on the actual gameplay of it, though, let's talk about his theme song. Gamma's theme song is actually a little unique in that it actively has no main vocalist. There is lyrics to it, but it's just a robotic voice going, "It's my pleasure, ready to die, give me the emerald, ready to die," in some formats across the thing. Which is very intentional because he is also the only inorganic character, and I think that's a really neat detail. The song itself actually doesn't even have a direct name, it's just the theme of E102 Gamma. Composed by Fumie Kumatami, written by her and Jun Senoi, and arranged by Jun Senoi. Gamma's campaign is, as I said earlier, the highlight of the latter half of the game, as not only does it have a really engaging story in my eyes, his gameplay just is fun, because it's a fun run and gun. It's a little short for my own tastes, yes, and I would love to see some expansion out of it in a potential remake, as I've said a couple times already in the past 2 parts. But I feel like this is also a case where it's short and sweet and ultimately works. Most people walk away from this campaign relatively pleased, compared to Big and Amy at the least. So it's ultimately still fine as it is. I myself still don't replay the latter half of the game too much, but that's just because I really enjoy playing specifically as Sonic and Tails a lot, as well as Knuckles. But if I come back to a campaign from the latter 3, it's absolutely always gonna be this one. Gotta give them credit, though. So far, Gamma has actively stayed dead, sort of. Gamma himself technically appears in 2 other games in the series. Sonic Shuffle, which is a party game, so no real plot there, really. As well as one specific game on the GBA I have yet to tackle and might at some point. But I forget what the plot significance is there, if it's even meant to be the same Gamma. Gamma's death has stayed true, and you can still feel his legacy in some character stories to this day, especially in games relatively soon after this. To the point where I still remember distinctly reading the issue of the Archie comics when Gamma dies, and that was a dark issue. Mind you, the Archie comics got like that relatively regularly. I still have yet to read IDW, and I hear they have their moments like that, but they're a little more constrained on how far they'll go with that. They'll never have what happened in Archie with Charmy the Bee ever again, is I think the best way to put that. Probably for the better in that case, at the least. God, I love this song. And Gamma's theme is one of my absolute favorites in the game. Its energy is just the right balance of, like, jazzy and energetic that it's just such easy listening for me. If there's any song I've listened to the most in this soundtrack, it's Open Your Heart, actually, which is the main vocal theme for the overall experience. But then it's probably, like, this, It Doesn't Matter, and Speed Highways song. Speed Highways especially is one I listen to a lot. Although I more listen to remixes of that from later games than the adventure version in specific. Not for nothing though, and I guess this is technically a thought I should save for the final ending sequence, but if there's one thing I really appreciate about the adventure-styled games between this, Adventure 2, and technically, I guess, Heroes, and even technically 06, the attempts at different mechanics for characters really do feel like they wanted to make this feel like a bigger thing. Which, Sonic games kind of go back and forth on doing that to begin with. I think Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 for their time feel big, but then you didn't really get another Sonic that felt like it was trying to be big until 06, honestly, and it failed. But then they really tried really big with Unleashed, which is why I really love that game. But then it feels like we went through a good period where they just didn't really try to do something of that scale again until Frontiers. Forces had its moments of seeming like it was going to try like that, but then the final product came out, and then, not so much. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 20, we begin the ending. See you guys then.